framing war as a divine mandate. When geopolitical wars begin to be interpreted as the fulfillment of prophecy, strategy gives way to theology, and diplomacy becomes almost impossible. The ongoing confrontation involving the United States and Israel, on the one hand, and the Islamic Republic of Iran and its regional brethren allies on the other hand, is fundamentally rooted in geopolitical realities. Regional security concerns, nuclear deterrence, strategic alliances, and the balance of power in the Middle East. Yet alongside these strategic motivations, a powerful interpretive framework is asserting itself within segments of political discourse, military rhetoric, and evangelical media ecosystems. In large parts of Western political and religious discourse, the conflict is increasingly interpreted and framed not simply as a geopolitical struggle, but as part of something far older and more dangerous, a civilizational and theological confrontation, as well as the fulfillment of biblical prophecy. This paper examines what can be described as a process of geotheological framing, that is, the reinterpretation of geopolitical conflict through theological narratives, prophetic symbolism, and sacred history. Drawing on documented statements by political leaders, internal complaints from military personnel, biblical symbolism invoked in wartime rhetoric, and scholarly analyses of Christian Zionist theology, it explores how contemporary political conflict can become embedded within apocalyptic narratives about the destiny of nations and the world as a whole. The result is not necessarily the creation of a purely religious war. Rather, it is the transformation of geopolitical conflict into something perceived by some actors as part of a divine historical process. Strategy and narrative. Modern wars are rarely understood solely through military strategy. They are also interpreted through narratives that give them meaning. In the case of the ongoing confrontation with Iran, these narratives increasingly intersect with religious language, prophetic symbolism, and apocalyptic expectation. Understanding these narratives does not require accepting them as literal truth, but ignoring their influence would mean overlooking an important dimension of how conflicts are interpreted and justified in public discourse. Scholars have long examined how religious ideas shape political narratives. Historian Paul Boyer observes, apocalyptic prophecy belief has profoundly shaped American political imagination, especially in relation to the Middle East. Political scientist Elizabeth Shackman Hurd writes, religion is not simply a private belief system. It actively shapes how international conflicts are interpreted and politically mobilized. And theologian William T. Cavanaugh argues that religious narratives rarely replace political interests. Instead, they often intertwine with them. History offers numerous examples of conflicts later interpreted through sacred narratives. Medieval crusaders marched toward the Levant, believing they were participating in a divinely ordained struggle. European colonial expansion often carried the language of religious mission. Even the Cold War was framed by some leaders as a struggle between absolute good and absolute evil. The First Crusade offers the most instructive and documented precedent. When Pope Urban II addressed the Council of Clermont in November 1095, he did not launch a war of territorial conquest, but a war of prophetic redemption, the liberation of Jerusalem as a collective act of salvation. Contemporary chronicles, including the anonymous Gesta Francorum, record that thousands of fighters took the cross not for strategic advantage, but because they sincerely believed they were participating in the fulfillment of prophecy. The result was the massacre of Jerusalem in July 1099, an act its perpetrators described with pride, revealing how far the certitude of divine mandate can lead. This is the oldest and clearest Western precedent for what this paper calls geotheological framing, and it ended in blood. It is worth noting that Samuel Huntington's influential framework of a clash of civilizations describes conflict between broad civilizational blocks. What the present paper identifies goes further: the active, deliberate weaponization of eschatological narrative by specific political actors to justify military action, a process Huntington's structural analysis did not anticipate and cannot explain. These precedents reveal a recurring pattern. When political conflicts become embedded in sacred narratives, compromise becomes more difficult and escalation more likely. The confrontation with Iran reveals something deeper about how modern conflicts are interpreted. At the strategic level, states pursue familiar objectives: security, deterrence, and influence. But wars are also fought in the realm of meaning. When political discourse invokes prophecy and military rhetoric echoes eschatology, geopolitical conflict can become reframed as a cosmic struggle. History suggests that such transformations are dangerous. Evidence from within the U.S. establishment. As early as 2014, we pointed out in a book that whatever their true masterminds and real motives, the attacks of September 11, 2001, provided the ideal opportunity for the United States and, incidentally, its allies to implement their strategy of domination in the Muslim world. The latter, despite its current weakness, is considered a potential adversary that must be continually divided and weakened while exploiting its significant natural resources, particularly energy. And that, since the invasions of Afghanistan in 2001 and Iraq in 2003, a new Sykes-Picot seems to be taking shape in the region. But whereas the Franco-British agreements of 1916 aimed to facilitate the creation of a state or a confederation of Arab states, the ongoing process aims to dismantle existing states. This strategy of massive disintegration would allow the United States to achieve a triple objective: ensure the preservation of its strategic interests in the region, strengthen the position of its Israeli ally, and thereby ensure its survival as a Jewish state, and redirect the bulk of its efforts and resources to the most important region of the world, the Pacific. Assuredly, since the 9/11 events, as explained by Stephen Green, a small group of neoconservatives, many of whom are senior officials in the Defense Department, National Security Council, and Office of the Vice President, have effectively gutted, they would say reformed, traditional American foreign and security policy. After reviewing the internal security backgrounds of some of the best known among them, he concluded that they had dual agendas while professing to work for the internal security of the United States against its terrorist enemies. Bill Christensen and Kathleen Christensen reached the same conclusion. They said that since the long-forgotten days when the State Department's Middle East policy was run by a group of so-called Arabists, U.S. policy on Israel and the Arab world has increasingly become the purview of officials well known for tilting toward Israel. These people, who can fairly be called Israeli loyalists, are now at all levels of government, from desk officers at the Defense Department to the Deputy Secretary level at both State and Defense, as well as on the National Security Council staff and in the Vice President's office. Interestingly, the Christensens were of the view that the dual loyalists in the Bush administration have given added impetus to the growth of a messianic strain of Christian fundamentalism that has allied itself with Israel in preparation for the so-called end of days. These crazed fundamentalists, they said, see Israel's domination over all of Palestine as a necessary step toward fulfillment of the biblical millennium. Consider any Israeli relinquishment of territory in Palestine as a sacrilege and view warfare between Jews and Arabs as a divinely ordained prelude to Armageddon, which raises the horrifying, albeit real, prospect of an apocalyptic Christian-Islamic war.